Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the next presentation here. Charles comes all the way from London, England. He's written 7 books on airline history, 3 volumes just about flying tigers, and watch for his new publication on Middle East Airlines.
Thank you for the introduction. I wonder if I put that there, can you still hear me? I guess you can. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Okay, I'll leave the mic there and maybe it'll pick it up because it just keeps my hands free. So I've got loads of photos to show you, but they're not in any order because I'm writing a book about MEA. It's a book I've wanted to write before I ever became a writer because I think their story is so unique. I remember even in the 90s, just out of my teens, I bought a couple of slides for this book that I probably didn't think I'd ever have a chance to write. But through an extraordinary turn of events, I got to meet MEA top brass last year, and they readily agreed to my proposal. And since then, I've been to Beirut 2 more times, and they've opened up their enormous archive, and I just went at it until my scanner started to smell like a barbecue. And so I've got 3 folders of photos, which are from those archives. They're not really in any order. Well, I've got the book, and indeed their story kind of falls quite easily to 4 natural chapters, which are Pioneer Days, Golden Age, Darkest Hour, and Renaissance. So within those 4 periods, there's no order. But I'm just going to quickly start with the Pioneer Days and the Golden Age stuff. And before I do that, just a very quick introduction about Lebanon. The country has a cultural identity that goes back thousands of years, but it was always a province of Syria, distinctive mostly because of its large Christian population. And France was the colonial power in the region, and the French carved Lebanon out of Syria in 1920. I think mostly because the French Empire was contracting. I think they thought if we give the Lebanese their own country, they'll always be grateful to France, and it's like we'll always have an aircraft carrier based in the Eastern Mediterranean, in a sense. So Lebanon became a country in 1920 and fully independent in 1948. It's tiny. It's like half the size of Connecticut. I don't think people realize how small it is. I always say it's half the size of Wales. That I know, and I think Wales is about the size of Connecticut, so it's really, really small. 4 million people, 17 official religions, which is mostly, it kind of breaks down as a third Christian, a third Sunni Muslim, and a third Shia Muslim. MEA was founded in 1945 with initially a couple of de Havilland, God, I'm spacing on the aircraft, little de Havilland airliner with the It's a biplane, tail dragon.
Dragon.
Repeat. Dragon. They started with a couple of repeats, and then they got some DC-3s. Flying to the obvious places: Baghdad, Amman, Cairo, Istanbul, and then expanding from there. Very Anglophile. They had Viscounts in the 1950s. We're going to see pictures in a minute. Viscounts, and then a very prolific operator of the Comet 4 from 1960 until 1970. They also have VC-10s, which we're going to see in a minute. The first VC-10 they had was leased from Ghana Airways. Hilariously, they really wanted to standardize on the VC-10, but and this is a time when, by the way, when Lebanon was the Switzerland of the Middle East, and owned by a bank, and Vickers decided that MEA couldn't afford VC-10s, even though MEA was like, please take our money, which is why MEA became a 707 operator. So maybe now's a good time just to click through a few photos from the MEA archive from the 1950s and 60s. So let's see if this is working. So some of them, some of these photos, because it's such a wealth of material, it's not in any order. Some of the photos are maybe less stimulating than others, but let's see what we've got. So this is, at MEA HQ in Beirut in the 1950s and 60s. For us, Lebanon's really famous for civil war and societal breakdown. But before the war, it was like I said, it was a Switzerland in the Middle East. I guess that's part of the narrative that we all know about the country, is that in the early jet age, it was a playground for the jet age, for the jet set rather, with the rich and famous. I mean, you can water ski, you can snow ski, casinos, shops, markets. So that's their first factory delivered 707. I have some of these in colour, but when the book happens, some of what you see in black and white will be in colour. And it was just going through the archive was just an absolute joy for an enthusiast. That's such a classic jet age image. Beirut, it was the Dubai of its time. MEA was an early sort of connecting carrier. I think up to half of their traffic before the war was connecting traffic. Because countries like the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, didn't have national airlines. In fact, I never really understood why it was called MEA, why it wasn't Lebanese Airlines or something. But it's because a lot of the rest of the region didn't have airlines. So it really was the airline for the region in the way that Emirates is now. In fact, a lot of their flights from Europe had a continuing flight number through Beirut all the way to Saudi or Kuwait. That's the Air Jordan. I think MEA was involved in creating it, which is not Alia / Royal Jordanian. That was a different airline. Air Lebanon was a competitor to MEA. The religious divide in the country that became a shooting war was even expressed before then in sort of in comments that MEA was sort of the English-speaking Anglophile airline, Air Lebanon, French, and Francophile, and owned by Air France in actual fact. MEA didn't fly to London until like 1968 or something like that. Air Lebanon, 64 actually, because Air Lebanon was taken over by MEA in 1964. Beautiful, such an attractive race, the Lebanese, and of course a beautiful Comet 4 in the background. That's Beirut Airport back in the day. This is Dubai in the 1960s, basically, you can say. I love the cedar tree on the nose, which was an MEA signature. Obviously, some of the that's the airport, the original airport, which is now covered in high-rise buildings and a sports stadium called Bir Hassan. It was closed in 1951 to be replaced by the current airport. So that's Bir Hassan, that's the original Beirut airport. And MEA was actually a very prolific operator of the DC-3, another thing I think people don't realize, a big fleet for quite a long time. There's a couple of things coming up. A new intake of cabin crew. Comet 4 over Beirut. You can see how attractive it is for tourism. The Mediterranean, and in winter all those mountains are covered in snow. MEA was also quite a prolific operator of the Convair 990. We'll see in a minute that they had a devastating attack in 1968. They lost most of their fleet. And Convair 990s were a quick and easy replacement. We'll see more of that in a minute. This is obviously Beirut Airport. That's the inaugural flight from Beirut to Dubai on a Comet 4. I'm sorry, some of the pictures, you can clearly see someone was still trying to work out how this scanner is working. Now this is interesting, of course. Israel was only created in 1948. So MEA flew for 3 years to Palestine. They flew to Lid and Haifa, and they flew to Jerusalem. And indeed, Jerusalem was an international city until 1968, when Israel expanded eastwards to the River Jordan. So until 1968, Jerusalem was a kind of a semi-international city, the western half controlled by Israel, the eastern half controlled by Jordan. and Jerusalem had an airport, and MEA flew there. And I think in part that was why they kept the DC-3 so long, because they had, it's a very short field, and this airport isn't open anymore.
It's still logically
I think so.
Palestinian Airways fly out of the...
They actually flew, Palestinian Airways flew out of a little strip in Gaza. Not little, around Gaza.
Gaza Strip.
Bit of a mystery, this one. Lebanese Air Transport, I'm still working on the provenance, and obviously an Antonov 24. This is the only image I've ever found of this operator. MEA had orders for Concords. I think, I can't remember off the top of my head what the line numbers were. It's like 36 and 49. They would have obviously been French-built Concords. Yeah, this is a real piece of history, because that's their Jerusalem ticket office, which obviously politically would be impossible today. That's inside the Jerusalem ticket office. This is their MEA's New York ticket office. Really beautiful, the kind of Arabian Nights style there. That's New York. It's Fifth Avenue. Oh, they had a bunch of Avro Yorks. MEA's in the, they share the misery of Malaysia Airlines and very few others to have lost an aircraft without ever finding it. And one of them, in fact, it was that frame, Delta Bravo, that went missing in the Mediterranean. No wreckage, no oil slick, lost at sea. That's in downtown Beirut, just again showing how Beirut was really the crossroads of the world. If you just look from left to right, we've got Pan Am, Sabina, Kuwait Airways, and Interflug ticket offices in a tiny space. Pan Am famously had the Pan Am 001, 002 round the world flights, and they stopped in Beirut in both directions every day. In fact, embarrassingly, I can recite the whole route, which is New York, London, Frankfurt, Istanbul, Beirut, Tehran, Karachi, Delhi, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Los Angeles. It's nothing to be punished, nothing. Beirut Airport, tech maintenance.
Oh, that's the repeat.
Yeah, that's the repeat, and two of their early mechanics. Their name is on the. I've scanned captions to get from the back of the photos. I don't know what kind of airplane it is. I don't want to know what kind of airplane it is. I know it's Italian. It's not MEA. It's something else, but something Lebanese. Might be Lebanese Air Force actually, which has sort of come and gone over the years. I think it's actually it might be Rome. I was going to say Frankfurt, but I don't think that you would have got the OAC in Frankfurt. Or and it's the TWA's been here. Okay, that's the end of that folder. Could you go to at the very top of that? So in this is that right? That's it. Perfect. So on the 28th of December 1968, well, actually a couple of days before then, an El Al 707 was machine gunned by Palestinian guerrillas on the ramp in Athens. No one was killed, luckily, but a few days later, the Israelis responded with an attack on Beirut Airport. On the 28th of December 1968, a fleet of Israeli helicopters was seen on Beirut radar coming in from the sea. One of them hovered over the airport road and threw down how would you describe it? Like a track with spikes to stop anyone getting in and out of the airport. And then the other helicopters landed on the ramp, and commandos planted explosives in all of the Lebanese aircraft that were on the deck. In some of these photos, you'll see Pan Am and KLM in the background, which were not targeted. And I can tell you the full inventory of aircraft destroyed, and we'll see them as we go through this. Many of these photos never seen before. So a brand new a brand new 707 that was just delivered from Seattle a few days earlier. 3 Comets, 2 Caravels, a Viscount, and a Ghanaian VC-10 were destroyed, and also a couple of other Lebanese aircraft, like TMA, the cargo airline. So that's the 7.0, obviously, MEA 707. It's I mean, maybe it's quite upsetting to see. I mean, I'm sort of used to these images because I've been working with them. It's sort of a rather macabre game of spot the aircraft type from what's left. Obviously a Caravelle. And actually I think it's a different one to the one we just saw. You can see the Pan Am in the background. I can slow down as well. We can skip through this. I guess that's a...
Well, that's a comment.
That's a comment. Yeah, that's a comment. Yeah, possibly a different comment. The comment and the VC-10 are hard to tell apart because where the two engines of the pairs of engines on a VC-10 when they're in a destroyed aircraft look a lot like the pairs of engines on a Comet 4. In fact, well, I don't even know how many airplanes are in that picture. It might be two.
Yeah, it's true.
So there was a short-lived airline called Lebanese International Airways, and their fleet consisted of, where you can see one there, they had a prop liner which seems intact, and they had two Convair 990s, and that's one of them. Your guess is as good as mine on that. Could be a Convair. So that's obviously in the minutes after the attack, but it's one of their Leah. I think they say Leah rather than Airline.
I see.
Wow. Yeah, I mean it's really apocalyptic, isn't it? I can't think of another example of such a wholesale destruction of airplanes and military attack. Although cartoon in Sudan in the last few months have again giving it a good shot. So this was the end of the end of Lebanon's honeymoon. That's quite interesting because you've got basically the whole fleet of Leah in a row there, the jet fleet of Leah. So that's a VC-10. For ages I thought it was a Comet because of the engine in pairs, but that's the Ghanaian VC-10 or what's left of it. Again, the VC-10. 707, I think. Oh, is that what I think it is? So this is a letter that was, I can read it out or you guys can read it. This was handed to passengers in the days after the attack because they were up and running within a day, but with an entirely leased fleet. Royal Jordanian, Royal Air Morocco, Egypt Air, Kuwait Airways, all sent airplanes. Maybe for time, I'll quickly read it out. We have allowed ourselves to count you among our friends, Lebanon's friends. It is as such that we are calling upon you at this moment, which is to our country and to our company a very tough blow. You've certainly heard of the raid by regular Israeli military troops against civilian aircraft to Beirut, result of which we've lost almost our entire fleet. You also know by now that we have always been at the service of peace, making ours the United Nations motto, peace through tourism, in spite of the violent war act perpetrated on us. Our ideal still is peace and comprehension. So that was given to passengers when they were boarding a Moroccan Caravelle to fly them from Beirut to Kuwait, perhaps. And there's the list of aircraft that MEA lost. Interesting with the hours on the airframe, and it shows at the bottom that their 707 was really brand new, 50 hours on the front, which would have included test flights and a delivery. So it may have actually operated passenger flights. And you can see the guy second from the right is Camille Chamoun. I don't know if he was still president, but he was the president of Lebanon at some stage. You can imagine the surprise and the horror. So there's the TMA DC-4. TMA is, I guess you're not a cargo airline, Lebanese cargo airline. Comments. VC-10, I think we get from the leading edge, VC-10. I guess, yeah. Okay, let's go to the next folder. So, That was December 1960. So let's go to darkest hour. So in how can I put it? I mean, yeah, the country was at peace for 6 more years mostly, but in 1975, the sectarian tensions between the different communities in the country became spilled into violence, and the war started in April 1975. MEA was able to function through most of 1975, even though the city was, at war, dividing into 2 halves: the Christians on the east, Muslims on the west. And just, I mean, the Lebanese are very resourceful people, very entrepreneurial, very resourceful, and so they were able to function. Indeed, it continued to act as a hub during the early years of the Civil War, I think, because MEA had a very good reputation, and possibly, especially with the conflict, they were probably selling tickets fairly cheaply. But for the employees, it became really a nightmare. The airline was paying rival militias to ensure that employees could get to and from work, although a lot of them stayed at the airport for days or weeks at a time. One of their training buildings became they call it the Sea Jet Hotel, where employees would sleep for days or weeks at a time. They did have a kind of they did okay with some of the militias, because as MEA put it, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you've still got relatives in Paris, you've still got relatives in Dubai. And MEA was a lifeline for the country, regardless of your personal religious or communal affiliation. On the 1st of January 1976, one of their 720s was blown up in flight over Saudi Arabia. It was the only aircraft they lost in the war in flight. The culprits were never found. But the fighting around the airport got worse in 1976, as 720 was destroyed on the ground with no passengers. The passengers had already deplaned, but the crew were killed. And a couple of days after that, the airport closed for nearly 3 months. But what's interesting is how quickly MEA was able to find charter work. They moved some of their aircraft to Cyprus, some to Damascus, some to Paris. And there was plenty of periods where the entire fleet of 20 aircraft were flying, and none of them to or from Beirut. Their chief pilot on the 747, they had 3 jumbos by the way, was with the aircraft in Paris, and he got a phone call from Air France that one of their jumbos had gone tag, and could MEA fly their jumbo on behalf of Air France to Guadeloupe. And they had 3 hours notice, and they made it happen. And that was really that flight was the beginning of MEA's third-party charter work. They flew for many airlines: Air France, UTA, British Airways, and those jumbos ended up being leased out, and that hard currency was used to meet the payroll. Those jumbos were combis, so they were able to command a premium for leasing, and they flew for Gulf Air, Saudia, Egypt Air, British Airways. What I might do is blast through these photos, and then we'll do a little bit more on the war years. So that's obviously a 707 interior. That would probably be during the war years. But for a lot of the time, the airport was a kind of oasis. Some of the stories I heard interviewing MEA employees were so interesting and so revealing, and many of them said they were quite happy to be at work because it distracted them from the fighting, and excuse me, and actually they felt safer. They felt safer at work than they did in their homes. And I think the other thing is that they always, because Lebanon had been turbulent, there was actually a mini civil war in 1958 with the US Marines coming in to put an end to the fighting. So I think they always thought that the war was about to end. That this is just a phase. I don't think anyone thought it was going to last for 15 years. But the point I'm making is that even when their country is in chaos, and 150,000 people died in the course of the conflict. But I think, yeah, because they thought it wasn't going to last. MEA was always looking to the future. So even in war years, they're adding routes, they're refurbishing aircraft. Some of these photos obviously show MEA's war role, either flying soldiers or flying politicians. This is a 1976 state visit of the president. I don't think it's any of those guys. But yeah, I mean, there's so many photos like this in the archive with guys in big glasses, enormous overflowing ashtray. The gentleman third from the left, who's looking down with the moustache, is Salim Salam. He later became the president of the airline. That's right. So this is the President Sarkis going to Latakia in Syria. Right, this is very unpleasant, especially possibly for Americans present. And I'm sorry for jumping around, but this is the 1983 attack on the Marines base. The Marines came in 1983 in the aftermath of the evacuation of the Palestinian group, the PLO. But they quickly became embroiled in the fighting, and they were attacked. That's the immediate aftermath of the explosion. The aircraft on the ramp is an Interflug IL-62. Some of the Eastern European carriers continued to serve Lebanon during the war years, partly because their arms industries were supplying different factions. This is obviously TMA taxiing in Beirut during the war. It's quite an evocative picture, actually, probably what it was like. That's possible, yeah. It's beautiful, beautiful. It will come as a surprise to no one that one of their 707s was bought secondhand from Braniff, which is why they adopted that so much. Because the very, very early TMA 707 just had a boring cheap line, but they bought one from Braniff, presumably a green one. I've got an idea. That's our staff canteen. Okay, so that's. I'm sorry to jump around so much. Israel invaded in 1982 to drive out the Palestinians, and they occupied the airport. And so MEA did lose a few more aircraft in the 1982 invasion and occupation. That will be the delivery of the jumbos. The jumbos arrived almost the same day that the war started. It's unbelievably bad timing. Lot lost one in a military transport, presumably bringing ops, flew into a hillside. I mean, it's very, as you've probably seen, very hilly terrain. Lot were not the only aircraft to lose an aircraft to control flight into terrain. The Lebanese never did. Okay, so that's the end of that folder. Let me just cover a few more. Actually, I might just skip to a nicer. Yeah, let's just have a look at the images. There we go. Okay, let's hang on to that for a second. Just a couple more things about how MEA survived during the war. When the war started, basically the central government lost control of the country. Every neighborhood was controlled by a different faction. And with no central government, it was very difficult to guarantee security at the airport, and especially on flights. And they had dozens of hijackings. They had a spate of hijackings in the late 1970s after a Shia imam was disappeared in Libya, probably killed by Gaddafi. I think he was like a very good guy. He's still talked about in glowing terms by not just Shia but other communities. And there was a series of hijackings of distraught Shia trying to bring attention to their missing imam. Hijackings to get a press conference. One of them was hijacked to Tehran to try and get Ayatollah Khomeini to intervene to try and find their missing imam. But it was mostly just a press conference and things like that. there was a case in 1985 when an airport employee hijacked a 707 to Cyprus to get better terms and conditions for airport workers. And there was a bit of a shootout, and the cabin crew evacuated the passengers while the aircraft was taxiing. But then when the hijackers realized that what happened, they were very upset, and at gunpoint they made the pilots take off with all the doors open and the slides hanging out. And they flew to Cyprus. And then in Cyprus, there's a phone call from the airport worker to his bosses. They said, yeah, when you come back, we'll look at your terms and conditions. So the airplane then flies back, still with all the doors open. And after landing, the guy is met by an airport car and driven back to his home. It's just, I mean, it's hard to imagine. But they're trying to run a semi-serious, 5-star airline in the middle of this absolute hell disaster of social breakdown. An alley, I don't think you've got a picture of it, but an alley at Jordanian 727 was hijacked and destroyed on the ramp in Beirut. And later that day, an MEA 707 was hijacked, and so you've got a hijacked aircraft taxiing through the smoke that's coming out of this destroyed Jordanian 727. 1985 was particularly memorable also because of the hijacking of TWA 847, which was a TWA 727 flying from Athens to Rome. It was hijacked and spent about a month in Beirut. And that was really a turning point for the country, I think, that hijacking. It was followed by a currency crash. And by the way, I should say that in the aftermath of the Israeli invasion, there was a very short period of stability with the US Marines at the airport, and a sense of weariness on the part of the country and hoping for stability. And there was that little window. MEA 747s came back and they started their flight to New York, which started in late '83, and it was Beirut, Paris, JFK, and they had fifth freedom rights from Paris to New York. It was famous for having a very nice product, especially the premium cabin, big recliners in first class in the nose, but almost lie flat in the upper deck, which was only available for people flying all the way through from Beirut to New York. The fifth freedom traffic between Paris and New York were on the main deck. And that ended with the TWA hijacking. Shortly after it, President Reagan banned Lebanese carriers from the United States, but the New York flight ended just before it because New York, JFK Baggage Handlers Union said the quote was, "We don't work for the convenience of terrorists," and so they wouldn't service the aircraft. So that was the end of MEA's short-lived transatlantic flight. Can we please go to the folder? I just thought the folder is called MISC Photos. So in MISC Photos, we're going to see some stuff we've already seen, which I'll click through quickly. That's Sheikh Najib al-Madin, who was the chairman from 1945 until 1978. So yeah, some of this we've seen, training. And again, I'm sorry for jumping around. I've got so much work to do on this book. It's like, this is the kind of thing you dream about when you've got a high fever. but in this folder are photos that we sorry to see all this horrible traumatic stuff twice. But in this folder we've got pictures of the New York service and some other historical stuff. Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. That's obviously history. Very nice. I think that the two countries actually have quite close relations. Ethiopian flies daily to Beirut, even today. So we're getting deja vu with some of this stuff. Was going to Nairobi. But actually Ethiopia did have a crash in Beirut not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago.
Who did?
It was pilot disorientation.
Who did?
Ethiopian. Yeah, we have seen this, but promise we're going to get to see some nice new stuff.
Look at that.
That's pre-war, obviously. You know, the Lives of the Rich and Famous backgammon in the 707. Now I think that's in Seattle because of the Northwest cargo in the back. That's sort of be pre-delivery. When I see Lebanese stuff, especially from just before the war, it's like I feel like I'm seeing pictures of the Titanic.
Yes.
You know, it's disaster is looming, and the people in the picture don't know it is. So that's with the that's great. I mean, honestly, the colours. There's a bunch of colour transparencies I'm getting scanned. Look like this, and it's just so beautiful. Some of the stuff. I should say, by the way, also very prolific operator of the Caravel. MEA have a fantastic safety record. One of their only accidents was they lost a Caravel in Dhahran, just a classic early jet age accident, disorientated in a sandstorm and descended into the ground. Very, very much of the age. It's a nice Caravel shot. I can go slower, but I feel like not all of it is. I know there's a fair bit of repetition or mystery stuff, but there's some real classic stuff in here. That's fantastic. It's great when you find old pictures that look like they were taken yesterday. That's an Avro
Bristol.
Sorry, Bristol.
Bristol.
It's a Bristol 170, right? Bristol 170 with the cedar tree on it. 20 years, like 80s. So this is Salim Salam. He won a special award in 1983 for the airline enduring during the war. Part of what makes a story so interesting isn't just their survival through the war. It's in their Capicoret, Toulouse, the Concorde. Is also how they managed to survive the post-war period, because they didn't have a plan for the post-war recovery. During the war, their ambition was survive. But then at the end of the war, they're still flying 707s, and it's 1991. I mean, the competition's got A320s. They had everything had been in the deep freezer for 15 years. They had like 3 computers, something crazy like that. That's nice. Retro.
The 321.
Yeah. It's obviously much more recent. The current chairman is with the light blue tie in the middle. So in the early 90s, I mean, they had a lot of work to do. They had to go from being, they had to leapfrog up to the present. They had to, they were very overstaffed because MEA was like a lifeline for a lot of communities. That's the inaugural flight to New York on the other day. I'm still trying to find more pictures. There's not that many pictures out there of the 747 interior. I'm still working on that. So MEA also wanted DC-8s. It's not particularly well known. That's even in Beirut. So the Douglas delegation went to Beirut for the ceremony. I think the reason it didn't go through is because the bank that owned MEA went bust. The intra-bank went bust, and I think it caused a hiccup in their finances. The gentleman with his hands up is Amin Jamayo. He was the president during the Civil War, in the 80s, in the later years of the war. His brother was elected and then assassinated before he could take office, and his brother then took over. I think that picture's probably at Is it Andrews or Edwards outside Washington? Andrews, there's probably an Andrews.
No, it's not, because there are Pan Am stairs, and there wouldn't be at Andrews.
Oh, well then it must be JFK. Because he did a big US state visit. Yeah, I guess that's it. They might even be the delivery actually. That's a nice shot. So the terminal's gone now. The new terminal is in its place. It has the same footprint, but that building is gone. Very big one. So there's the MEA ticket counter at JFK. It's just a lot of different things. That's in 82 after the Israeli invasion and occupation of in 82. So as the MEA lost 20 planes and they were mostly replaced by 720s from American and Western. And I think we've got a really, really interesting, very historic picture that illustrates that just coming up. Gosh, that's one of those DC-3s and a college. Well, that's the signing of the DC-8. See, that's fantastic. So much retro hardware on that ramp. Ooh, that's nice in colour. So that's the current chairman. And he sacked half the payroll. Classic pre-war lineup. Yeah, so that's what I was looking for. So that's a Western 720 in Beirut in about 82, being painted and turned into a cedar jet. The pilots of the old boys who flew the 707s and 737s. Oh, by the way, the war generation of the guys before, they learned to fly in the UK, in a place called Perth in Scotland. And retirees who were in maintenance also have very fond memories of England because they all worked on Comets and Viscounts and things, so they're all training in Hatfield. This looks like a return of a 747 to Beirut after the war. Yeah, so they got the jumbos pretty much the day the war started, and they spent 15 years in exile, and then in the 90s they finally came home and even flew to Sydney via Singapore and Sao Paulo via Dakar and Senegal, which is some pretty exotic stuff. This is the delivery of obviously the A330. There's nice, that's the delivery flight of the first A330 from Toulouse, circling over Beirut Airport, which, as you can see, it's got these two runways in a V shape. We're looking due south along the Mediterranean coast, so Israel is that way, and Syria is that way. It's a tough neighborhood. So yeah.
That's beautiful.
So the terminal, the old terminal was the same shape, but they just, and what they did was they knocked down half of it and built the new terminal, and then they knocked down the other half and built the new terminal, so there was never a really interruption of service. And then they built a runway on reclaimed land, because if you look, I've got a new. That was the old arrival runway, and you can see that the approach path was right over downtown. And it was only in the late 90s they built this runway on reclaimed land. So now you fly down the coast with a beautiful view of the city on the left. But in the classic days, you're coming right over the city, which must have been absolutely deafening. Convair 990s and 707s at like 2,000 feet over downtown. But it's a noisy city. I mean, the Lebanese are actually a lot less crazy than I thought they were when I embarked on this. but they are crazy drivers. They are maniacs, and there's a lot of this on the board. So it's a noisy city, but so I think those objects probably fit in quite nicely. And so obviously on the ramp in Beirut in the 90s, post-war livery, cheap ones, heavy check. A lot of engineering excellence. I mean, they're a very educated, cultured bunch. With a good legacy of engineering, so they can do their own heavy checks. A330 delivery. Just before I wrap up, I just want to make sure that I haven't missed any. Well, let me run through a couple of. That's the VC-10 that was leased from Ghana with a couple of officials, Ghanaian officials.
Did they have all these?
I think they had two. One was leased from Ghana, retaining its Ghanaian. Retaining its Ghanaian registration. One which was leased from the UK. So just a couple of some stories from the war, how they were able to survive. One thing that is that they weren't able to get jet fuel delivered a lot of the time. So on occasions when the jumbos were home during the war, they would fly empty to Cyprus, which is only about 100 miles away, fill every tank, tiptoe back, and then decant the fuel from the jumbo into a couple of 707s to maintain skeleton service to Dubai and Paris, basically. So literally using jumbos as civilian tankers. Another thing that's unique is that the war ended in 1990, but some of the worst years for fighting were 89 and 90 itself. There were crossing points in the city between the two halves, between the two factions, which were very dangerous, but you could get from one side of town to the other. And the airport is in West Beirut, in the Muslim half. But in 89 and 90, it was pretty much impossible to cross from one side to the other. So MEA flew a morning and an evening 707 flight to a little strip on the other side of the city to bring people, because people on the east side of the city couldn't get to the airport. And so it was about a 15-minute flight, flight numbers 1 and 2 in the morning, 3 and 4 in the evening, to bring passengers into so they could take international flights. But indeed, local Beirutis would take those flights to get to work or to visit friends and family, even though they were only living maybe 5 miles away. But it's just another example of how this is an airline and a country that just weren't going to give up. Before I wrap this up, I'm just going to think if I can get any other stuff. I mean, for me, those are the two most unique things: using jumbos for fuel, tankers, and flying, from one side of the city to the other, because it was the only way to get across town. And then the war ended in 1990 with a new agreement on power sharing within the different factions, and then this incredible effort to rebuild, re-equip, and get guys who only find 707s into modern Airbus cockpits. It's a pilot's airline with a really good sort of CRM culture, a just culture. So, for instance, which goes even to the present day. It was explained to me that they have monitoring of all the parameters on the aircraft. And so if there's an incident or something, they said not only will we collaborate with the pilots without consequences to find out what went wrong and what we can do to improve things, but they said often it'll be the pilots who will report to us first to say that we made a mistake, and let's sit down together to figure it out. So I think because there were airlines that did struggle with the transition from analog to digital cockpits, either with accidents or incidents, and I think MEA, because of the gap that they had to cover, but they never had any incidents running away, runaway automation or anything like that. And it's an honor for me to be able to tell this story because I think it's unique in the history of aviation. and yeah, I'll be finished with the book in a couple of months, and I hope that you guys will enjoy it. I'm just going to I wanted to pause on that one for my closing remarks because it's a beautiful painting. But let's just see if there's anything else in this. I think what we're going to see is a picture of my passport photo. Oh, okay, I lied. There's some more anti-wear stuff that I've got that's not on this drive, which is absolutely stunning stuff. It's really beautiful. I can't wait for you to see some of the colour stuff I've got of the Convair 990s, and yeah, it's got to be right. Well, it's Lebanese registration. I agree it is, but it's got Lebanese registration because a lot of those early pre-delivery test flights I've got in November. Oh, that's interesting. Ooh. That's got to be 75. So in that photo, downtown is getting chewed away by bullets, and there's checkpoints going up, and the war is just getting started. And they've got their brand new jumbo. Gets all those Titanic images. Oh yeah, we've got a few more pictures. That's their first jumbo on the line in Seattle. Yeah, they're jumping around. There might be a little bit more jumbo stuff. Yeah. I mean, you can see what the terrain is like. I mean, it's just a very, very narrow coastal plain, and they go straight up into the hills. Very popular with Saudis and Kuwaitis in summer, because as you know, I'm sure those of you the temperature drops 2 degrees for every 1,000 feet. And some of the higher mountains in Lebanon are maybe 4,000 feet elevation. That's an 8-degree temperature drop. So for Saudis escaping from the summer heat, it's really an attractive place to be. That's nice. In the 1982 Israeli invasion, the Israelis stole half the archive. I'm secretly relieved because there was so much. If this was double the size, I don't know what I'd do. And they took their 707 simulator as well. Now that's a Boeing, guys.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
We're just wrapping up.
Okay, guys, I gotta tell you something. I left a bag on the pass-out table with some very important stuff earlier, and I just found it. Okay? And one of the items I have been carrying around since last fall for Charles. And this is a little MEA address book. With pictures of the Caravel and the Comet and a little route map. I found this last fall in Beirut. I bought it with the intention of giving it to Charles.
Jim, thank you so much.
You said you've had a tough time ever finding any stuff in Beirut.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I've scoured Beirut, flea markets and things. I did find a bunch of Motown singles, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, all in Arabic on the label, and I didn't buy them. That was 23 years ago, and I think about it every day.
I've been to Beirut one day,
but I never found any MEA stuff ever.
and I'm there one day, and I found that, and I thought of you, and I carried it around, and I left it on the pass-out table. Somebody picked it up, and I just happened to find it. I won't tell you the story, but it's for you.
It's so generous. Thank you so much. And the year is 1968.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, that's what a lovely way to wrap up. There's MEA on the wall in Toulouse. This is interesting actually. They did quite a lavish farewell ceremony for the Convair 990s, and that's the last one leaving. And you can see so the Cedar's been taken, and I have seen this aircraft around. And I think it went back to the USA actually, maybe just for scrapping. But I have seen it with the empty roundel, but I've never seen it on the deck in Beirut before. But yeah, Oh, and when they retired the 707 in about 1996, there was no ceremony, nothing, not even a cake. Because I asked every 707 guy that I met, because the 70 was the backbone right from the end of the 60s until 1996. Any visitors to Europe in the 90s will remember seeing 707s in a sea of Airbus and modern bones.
I think because the Lebanese felt really ashamed.
I think that's exactly true. I think they wanted to move on.
Because at that time, my supervisor was a native Beirut.
Right.
And he went back home in the summer of '95. He went back for a visit.
Yeah.
And I said, please get a stack of safety cards.
Yeah.
And when he came back, he said, all they had were all these tiny Boeings. So I threw it out and got you the Delta
767
cards. Yes. And I've trained him since. But they kind of feel a sense of shame.
No, I think it's a very good point. Enthusiasts in the 90s would fly on MEA to get including myself, to fly the 707, and in the timetable they were called Jet. They had Airbus A310 Series 300 and Jet. And you hear stories of enthusiasts going to ticket offices and saying, which flight's going to be the 707, and get quite a hostile reception. And every 707 guy I spoke to, said the same thing. But I don't even think it was deliberate. I think it was they were happy to see the back of them. The last one.
Like it represented the war.
It represented the war, yeah. And after the passengers got off, it was towed to the maintenance area. And I think most of them were used as part of the I don't know what you call it really, I suppose the re-engineing and re-equipping of the KC-135s and the what's the one with the spinning roof rack? E8?
A1.
A1.
Yeah.
E3. So I think we're pretty much at the end of. That's right. That's an Air Lebanon in an Air France hybrid. So a little bit of Air Lebanon action there. Oh, I hope we're not ending on that. Probably the delivery of the 74. Some engineering stuff. That's me learning to use the scanner. That's all 1968 stuff. That's the project.
That's Leo.
That's Leo. Yeah. Sorry to end on a downer, but it's better than my passport photo. I think we've still got that coming. Oh, some menus. So that's about 2 months after the beginning of the Civil War, so I wonder if it really operated. Wait, it did, it's got the stamps on it. So it goes to show that in the, even in the early years of the war, that's President Ceausescu of Romania visiting Lebanon. There's a couple more celebs. That's early A310. That's Enrique Iglesias.
No,
not Enrique.
Coolio.
Of course. I'm not much of a sports guy, but I think is that Pele?
Yeah, it looks like him.
That's a late 90s. It's a 90s 707 final incarnation. This is an industrial action in the 1950s at Air Lebanon. Chairman in the middle. That's Anwar Sadat, President of Egypt, from 70 to 80. Operations. I think we've seen that before. It's the inaugural flight to Dubai, 1966. Big contrast there. The A330. Jerusalem, John Bowen delivering New York. scene. Trade show, holiday, sports, health, culture, and business. Now that's a test flight of a Comet 4. And by the way, Beirut joined the jet age the same day as the jet age began, on the 2nd of May 1952, because the first BOAC Comet was London, Rome, Beirut, a couple of stops in Africa down to Joburg. It would have been Cairo, but it was just after, 1952 was just after the Egyptian revolution. So Cairo wasn't the place to be. So Beirut was Beirut's triumph. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm going too fast. I feel like, because it's not in order, and some of them aren't brilliant, so I'm in the habit of skipping quickly, but some of these are actually really beautiful. I don't know what. So Air Lebanon was taken over in 1964 to create Middle East Airlines, Air Lebanon. And I don't know why they're still MEA Air Lebanon today. I think maybe it's just an acknowledgement of the Christian community and the French history of Lebanon. Okay, that's it. So that's my presentation. Sorry it was slightly all over the place, but I hope you enjoyed the archives.